Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fitaurus Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fitaurus. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday, we have ShineG in the Bullethell, a shoot 'em up that recently released on Steam Early Access. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. So as we start the game, we're going to take a quick moment to pause and talk a little bit about the character itself. So there's a lot of customization that's present in the game itself, or at least it looks to be the case. Not fully implemented yet, but it looks like there'll be an equipment slot that we can go and change for our protagonist switch over here. We also have the ability to change your outfit, of which there are 2 in there. And it looks like that should also change our special skill, but at this point it doesn't look like that's been fully implemented. The only special skill we have is really a bullet time skill. Still, some interesting promise here, the ability to have different outfits with different skills for our witch, and as well as different items. Let's talk a quick little bit about what we have for gameplay itself though. Returning to the game, we see that we're flying around as a witch with a cute little kitten on our head, battling fairies. So the only story I could come up in my head on this one is that this witch is part of an anti-fairy squad, flying down this ravine trying to take out as many of these fairies as she possibly can. So the game employs an auto-fire system, so the shots fire on their own. On the left we have our weapon power, which is indicated by the power 1, that's the red bar. The blue bar is our special skill, which as I mentioned earlier is a bullet time. It slows down time for a bit, but it depletes the bar really fast. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it appeared that the weapon actually, or the effect stopped before the bar actually drained. And then rather than have 1-ups, we have a life system, which is represented by the green bar with a heart. On the right, we have our weapons. So the game does employ an interesting magic combination system. There are 3 different elements of weapons that are magic shots that we can potentially get. Those are fire, ice, and lightning. And as we collect more of those, if we get, well, different orbs will create different effects. So in this case, we've got 2 fire and 1 ice gives us this kind of long range. Wow, that's actually really neat. Gave us a kind of long range flamethrower. Now we've got this explosive effect. If we add lightning to it, we're throwing these relatively slow but hopefully powerful fire saws. That's actually really neat. So here we've got segments in the stages where we have to dodge obstacles. As long as we continue this, it'll come to an end, or if we happen to hit something ourselves and take some damage, it'll end that sequence. So if you don't want to mess around with that, you can end it quicker on your own. So between each wave of enemies, there are the presents that we've been collecting that have weapon energy inside them. We also can get weapon energy from defeating the fairies, and there are also other items that power up our stats on the left. There are 5 stats over there total: fire rate, which is pretty self-explanatory; quantity, which is, I'm assuming, the number of bullets we have on screen; through, which, oh, we reset our weapon all the way back to default. Through, which I'm assuming is the piercing that our shots have; range, once again self-explanatory; and speed. So as we continue to fight these waves of fairies, the fairies have begun firing shots. So the game boasts a dynamic difficulty system, so the better you do, the harder the enemies get. The shots are one thing I do want to talk about, as you might have noticed they're an interesting, well, not necessarily interesting, but the shots are black with a colored border. And that's not something that I am thrilled about overall, though, because they actually make things very difficult. You might notice that, especially now that we've come to the boss of the first stage, the backgrounds are actually quite dark. So having the enemy shots have a black center with a rather thin colored border makes them hard to see. So I really like the combination of weapon that we have right now. We've got 2 lightnings and an ice, which gives us this awesome... Looks like we're firing basically electric needles, and it does deal quite a bit of damage. We're making short work of the boss here. A little bit more. And bam. Boss done, and we move on to the second stage. So now we have volcano background behind us, and we're dealing with some larger enemy fairies. So that's basically what we have for ShineG and the Bullethell. It has some interesting systems and the promise of some unique gameplay for a shoot 'em up. I don't like the fact that the shot is auto-fire. I do like to have more control over my firing than that, but in the end it works relatively well. The special skills need to be more fully implemented, as I feel that just having bullet time doesn't necessarily help us in most of the situations. As long as we can see the shots, they're usually easy enough to dodge. So, what are my final thoughts for the game itself? I really like the magic combination system, in theory at least. In practice, it seems a little hard to control what you would really get in the end, whether you'd want to pick up a power-up or not. Until you've played the game multiple times, it'd be hard to know if you're getting the combination that you want to receive. So it'd be great if there was some way to tailor that. Here's something that we haven't seen yet. It is possible to get some servants, as it were, to help you attack the enemies themselves. So we just collected another ice, and now we've got this homing laser shot. I had something similar to this in one of my other playthroughs, but it was actually quite weak. This seems to be doing much better. So if we add fire to our mix, what do we get? I have a hard time telling. Oh, okay, I see. It looks like we've got some sort of starburst that's dealing damage that's following distance in front of our character. Also, I think the characters are... the fairies and our protagonists are like quite cute in design as well, if it had seemed a little odd that what we're doing is going around fighting a whole bunch of fairies. The game is also procedurally generated, so like the waves of enemies will always be unique. You start with a different starting element, one of the 3 at random, so there is definitely that. So the game itself does have promise, but I do feel that there are plenty of suggestions that can be made. For one thing, there is a complete lack of scoring, so it takes a little bit out of the game to have a shoot 'em up without any type of score, whether the score is relevant or not. As I mentioned before, I feel that the bullets are hard to see from the enemy, so one thing I'd like to see would be maybe, even if they keep the black with colored borders, maybe a greater or a thicker colored border on the bullets. That would be something that would be awesome. There were a couple things that, from my initial playthroughs, that I had issues with. It looked like they've already been taken care of to some extent. So my first few times through the game, there were basically no other weapon drops. So the whole magic combination system didn't even really come into play for me, but it looks like that's something that they fixed. And also, as you pick up power-ups, it was hard to tell what those power-ups did. Once again, now it also appears that they're working on that, and there's icons that indicate which stats are being increased. So already the game is seeing promise and improvement. So if you're interested in trying out an experimental shoot 'em up that's got some interesting features, and or you have a hatred of fairies and want to see them all die, then I'd recommend trying ShineG in the Bullethell out. It's available, as I mentioned, in early access. I'll include the link in the description below. So, as always, I want to thank you so much for coming out and joining me for Shoot 'em Up Saturday. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.